South Wales never stood a chance. In the dead of night, while most people slept, Storm Claudia unleashed a burst of rainfall so intense it pushed entire rivers over their limits, transforming peaceful towns into deep, violent lakes in a matter of minutes. Streets vanished. Cars were lifted off the ground and swept away like debris. Homes that had stood for generations filled with 10 feet of cold, fast-moving water before their owners even realized what was happening. Monmouth, Ewyas, Herald, and villages along the England-Wales border woke up not to a storm, but to a disaster zone. What began as a simple rain band, something Americans see every fall and winter, turned into a catastrophic flood that hit with the force of a major Gulf Coast storm surge. Rivers didn't just rise. They exploded past their banks, tearing through defenses and swallowing entire communities in hours. And here's the part that should make every American pay attention. This wasn't a hurricane. It wasn't a tropical system. It wasn't even a named windstorm. It was just rain, the kind of setup that could hit any river town in the United States, from Kentucky to Vermont to the Pacific Northwest. If you're the kind of person who watches storms, studies disasters, or can't look away when nature shows its true power, this is a story you don't want to miss. Because what happened in the UK is more than a flood. It's a warning.
It's not very good that the rain is picking up again, is it?
Storm Claudia didn't roll in with hurricane-force winds or thunder booming across the night sky. It arrived quietly, just another rainy evening in the UK, the kind most people would ignore. But beneath that calm surface, the atmosphere was loading a weapon. A narrow band of moisture stalled over South Wales, and the England-Wales border pulling in wave after wave of Pacific-style moisture and dropping it all in one concentrated hit. Between midnight and dawn, more than 4 inches of rain hammered the Mono and Wye River basins, an entire month's worth of water, unleashed in a handful of hours. The ground underneath was already saturated from weeks of storms, so every drop that fell went straight into the rivers. By 1 hours a.m., gauges were climbing faster than meteorologists could update their models. By 1:30 a.m., the Mono River surged more than 10 feet above normal, blasting past flood limits and blowing out barriers that had protected these towns for decades. Streets that had been bone dry just a few hours earlier were suddenly unrecognizable. Water poured across intersections, rushed down alleys, and filled homes as if a dam had burst upstream. This wasn't the slow, creeping rise of a typical river flood. This was a rapid inland flash flood, the kind Americans usually associate with sudden mountain downpours in Colorado, or the tragic overnight floods in eastern Kentucky. Storm Claudia didn't need wind or thunder to become deadly. All it needed was rain too much, rain too fast in a region that never saw it coming.
Here at the moment, I hope he makes it to safety. Called for help, but
by sunrise, the full extent of the destruction hit with the force of a gut punch. Monmouth, normally a quiet historic town with cobblestone streets and riverfront cafes, was gone beneath a massive sheet of brown, debris-filled water. Entire blocks sat under 6 to 10 feet of flooding, deep enough to submerge pickup trucks and push small cars against buildings, like they weighed nothing. Storefronts disappeared behind swirling currents. Streetlights stuck out of the flood, like lonely markers in a new, unwanted lake. A few miles away, Ewyas Herald faced the same nightmare. The water didn't creep in. It rushed in, filling neighborhoods at a speed more typical of a flash flood in the American Southwest than a river valley in the UK. Families woke up to icy water on their staircases. Backyards became rivers. Roads normally crowded with school buses and morning commuters vanished beneath a rolling, churning mass of runoff. From the air, the scene looked like something ripped from a Weather Channel disaster special. Roof lines poked barely above the water. Farmland was drowned under hundreds of acres of floodwater, stretching from tree line to tree line. Trees stood half submerged. Cars floated like toys in a bathtub. What made it even worse was the silence. No engines, no foot traffic. Just the sound of water, moving where it never belonged. This wasn't a river overflowing its banks. This was a complete transformation of the landscape. A peaceful pair of towns turned into deep, sprawling lakes in a matter of hours, leaving thousands stunned, displaced, and unsure of how fast things would get worse. As floodwaters swallowed one neighborhood after another, the rescue effort exploded into a race against time. Crews from across South Wales and Western England were deployed long before sunrise. Firefighters, ambulance teams, mountain rescue units, and even coastal lifeboat crews normally stationed miles from the ocean. Roads were useless, buried under chest-deep water, or ripped apart by fast-moving currents. So boats became the only way to reach people trapped inside their homes. Rescuers pushed inflatable rafts through swirling brown water, packed with hazards, broken branches spinning like spears, metal siding, torn from sheds, propane tanks bobbing in the current, and entire fences drifting down the street. In some areas, the water moved with the strength of a mountain river in spring thaw, powerful enough to pull rescue boats toward intersections where the current funneled into dangerous whirlpools. Overhead, helicopters scanned roof lines and second-story windows for signs of life, their spotlights cutting through fog and rain. Entire blocks sat silent except for the rushing water. No lights, no engines, no electricity. Inside flooded homes, families huddled on staircases and upper floors waiting for the sound of a rescue boat bumping against the siding. Many had no phone signal, no heat, and no way to know how high the water would rise. Emergency shelters filled up fast. Volunteers handed out hot drinks, blankets, and flashlights to families who arrived soaked, shivering, and carrying whatever they could save in a single bag. First responders rotated through exhausting shifts, stepping off one rescue, only to be sent immediately to another. And still the calls kept coming. People stranded in attics, elderly residents unable to evacuate pets, trapped behind fences, vehicles swept into ditches. It was a rescue operation, unlike anything the region had faced in years, relentless, dangerous, and stretched to the breaking point. For many who lived through it, the memory of headlights disappearing underwater and rescue boats weaving through their streets will never fade. As rescue crews fought through the chaos, the numbers coming in from river gauges confirmed the terrifying truth. This wasn't just a bad flood. It was a record-shattering hydrologic event. The Monmouth and Ewyas rivers didn't simply rise. They skyrocketed, surging to heights over 11 feet above normal, smashing through previous records set during Storm Dennis in 2020 and Storm Babet in 2023. These weren't incremental increases. They were water levels that stunned emergency planners and overwhelmed systems never designed for this kind of surge. The impact on infrastructure was immediate and devastating. Hundreds of acres of farmland vanished beneath floodwater, so deep it looked like a new inland bay on satellite imagery. Roads buckled under pressure. Bridges groaned as debris slammed into their supports, and entire intersections disappeared underwater, deep enough to cover car windshields. Major transportation routes feeding into the West Midlands were shut down. Rail service collapsed across multiple counties. Even ferry routes between Wales and Ireland were suspended as high water and violent runoff pushed beyond safe operating thresholds. Electrical systems fared no better. Substations flooded, transformers blew out, and thousands of customers lost power as neighborhoods slipped into darkness, leaving families without heat communication or any clear understanding of what was coming next. Even high-clearance rescue vehicles struggled, forced to navigate currents that moved with the strength of a mountain river during spring melt. This wasn't just a flood overwhelming homes and businesses. It was a complete infrastructure failure, the kind Americans have seen in major disasters from Louisiana to Vermont. Storm Claudia exposed a brutal reality when extreme rainfall hits faster and harder than a region's defenses can handle. Entire systems snap under the pressure. When the water finally began to pull away, it didn't reveal safety. It revealed devastation. Entire neighborhoods in Monmouth, Ewyas, Herald, and nearby villages were left coated in thick, heavy mud that clung to everything it touched. Homes that had taken on 5 to 8 feet of water were destroyed from the inside out. Soggy drywall collapsed in sheets. Floors bowed and buckled. Refrigerators floated into living rooms. Beds, couches, children's toys, family photos. Everything families had built their lives around lay scattered in muddy piles on front lawns. Outside the towns, the destruction was just as brutal. Thousands of acres of farmland were drowned under slow-moving floodwater, turning entire fields into brown, motionless lakes. Crops nearing harvest were wiped out overnight. Livestock were stranded on shrinking patches of high ground surrounded by water, stretching hundreds of yards in every direction. Fences twisted hay-soaked feed supplies, ruined, leaving farm families with financial losses they'll feel long after the news cameras leave. But the emotional toll might be the hardest to measure. Children walked through knee-deep mud, trying to salvage a single stuffed animal. Elderly residents stood silently outside homes with water lines reaching halfway up the windows, staring at decades of memories washed away in a few hours. Volunteers poured in from surrounding towns, working shoulder to shoulder with exhausted families to scrape mud off floors, haul ruined belongings to the curb, and check on neighbors who had lost everything. Community centers turned into shelters, offering hot meals, bottled water blankets, and a dry place to rest. Power crews worked around the clock to reconnect neighborhoods, still sitting in the cold and dark. But for many families, recovery won't be measured in days or even weeks. It could take months. And for some years, to rebuild what Storm Claudia took in one night. This wasn't just a flood. It was a life reset, one forced on thousands of people without warning, leaving them to rebuild from the mud up. Storm Claudia may have moved on, but its message is still sitting in the mud, the wreckage and the shattered routines it left behind. What happened in South Wales and Western England wasn't just a flood. It was a demonstration of how fast extreme rainfall can overpower entire regions, how quickly rivers can explode past their banks, and how fragile our defenses become when the atmosphere delivers more water than we were ever prepared for. For the families who lost their homes, the farmers facing ruined harvests, and the first responders who waded through freezing debris-filled water to save lives, this was more than a storm. It was a life-changing moment. And for those of us watching from afar, especially here in the United States, it's impossible to ignore the parallels. From Vermont to Kentucky, from Texas to the Pacific Northwest, We've seen our own towns disappear under sudden walls of water. And events like this are becoming more frequent, more intense, and more unpredictable. If this story made you stop for a moment, if it reminded you how quickly nature can flip our world upside down, don't let it fade. Hit like to help this story reach more people. Share it with someone who follows extreme weather. Subscribe for more real-world storm coverage, survival stories, and the science behind our changing planet. And now we want to hear from you. Do you believe catastrophic floods like this are becoming the new normal? Or was Storm Claudia a rare freak event? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective matters, and your voice helps shape the conversation about what's coming next.